And it's pre-show time, everybody. Thanks for being here on our live stream. We can pause this because I can see myself fine. It is our pre-show for today's N10-009. That is our Network Plus study group. I am in the middle of making sure that everything is working and running and streaming, and so far so good. Our last live stream, we got hit with a power outage 5 minutes before we started. That was great. Let's not do one of those today. I think we're okay. For those of you that were here last week when I had the power outage, we lost internet connectivity during that outage, and I mentioned at the time that it was because I had purchased a UPS specifically for my ONT. My ONT is in a separate area than the rest of my technology closet of stuff that is on UPS. So it's up somewhere else, and it doesn't have a UPS. And it's in this very tiny little area. You can't put it like a regular sized UPS. So I got a DC UPS. Not the comic book company. This is DC being the direct current. So it plugs into the DC side, and it has its own converter in there, inverter. And it does create, and I tested it out. It works perfectly. Everything's always running on battery, so it doesn't have to switch over. That's the beauty of that setup. So that's in place. And I had lights in here that were not on the UPS. So when the power went out, the lights went off. Also something you don't want if you're streaming. So those are now on the UPS. In fact, the lights that are behind me, those right here, these were the ones right here that were not on the UPS, and now they are. And I tested those. My biggest problem was I didn't want it to beep in the middle of a live stream if the power went out. So I was able to configure it. There is a configuration option in my UPS that allows me to run it in a silent mode. So that worked perfectly as well. I unplugged it and everything works. So I'm happy with that. So there's always something. It's like owning a boat. When you have all of this, you have to keep working and maintaining and cleaning and getting new equipment and scraping off the barnacles. What? Yes. Well, I guess in a not a literal sense, the figurative barnacles. Hello, chat room. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here in our pre-show. We get started in about 7 minutes. You can see the time. We start at the top of the hour. This is our pre-show where I go through and make sure that everything's working. And is it? It appears to be. Are people on the stream? These are always important things to know. Yes, they are. There are people hanging out. So it's really now we're just going to sit and wait. No, there's nothing. Everything is working, which is unusual, as many of you know. It's not that unusual. Numbers look good on the stream. We're putting out about 6 megabits per second to YouTube that you end up seeing about 7 or 8 seconds after I send it, because they reconstruct it and send you a very specific stream. Our caching number should be around 3 and 4%. You can see most of the time it's on 3. Occasionally it'll bump up to 4. That's not unusual. If it gets above those, then we know we have a problem. For example, let's say the power goes out and you lose your ONT. Well, then it will definitely go up to 100. And that's not what you want. That was fun. What's great is you can go back and look at the replay, and as the power came back and the connectivity came back, the cache started sending out the older content. So you see me troubleshooting and watching for the link to come back up, and then it finally does, and then it kind of jumps to modern day, jumps to the current time. So there's a little bit of a time warp in there on the previous pre-show. But we are in good shape now. I'm happy with the UPS I got. It's running like a champ. I'm happy with the UPS in here. In fact, we did sort of an overall power audit, if you will, of everything, and I'm very happy with where that is. I need to figure out how much power I really am using on this desk, just to get a specific number. I didn't have that number, and I didn't want to rip apart my my cables, my power cables, to clamp one side of the AC connection. Not what I'm shooting for. So I need to get some type of monitor in place that will run while everything else is running, which would be kind of nice, really. People are checking in. Oh, if you would like to put your digital pin on our pin cushion, our online pin cushion, which is our map of the world here, you could certainly do that. Let me give you a better shot of that. There it is. There's people that are checking in right now. Got a lot of folks here in North America. Now, 2 folks in the Caribbean. I have a feeling Malk is here. It's not in the chat yet, or my chat's not running. I noticed my chat was not running. Or either my chat's not running. It's one of those things where is the chat not running or are people not talking to you? Those are 2 different things. So I think we're okay. Yeah, see, suddenly, whoop, did you see that screen? No, you didn't see the screen because it wasn't there. Suddenly, it pops up there. Yep, there it is. So he was up there. He was way up there. I just missed the whole thing. Thanks for being here, Mal. Good to see you. Glad you're here. I knew I needed to. YouTube did not give me an updated page there. It was just sitting there stuck, which is not a good feeling, by the way. But looks like it's going now. Folks are checking in from all over. Not just the Caribbean, not just St. Vincent, where Malk is. We got folks checking in from all over the place. I can see some here. New Jersey is here. Detroit, Germany is here. West Virginia. A lot of folks hanging out. Thank you for being here. We've got a lot to do today. It's all Network Plus. I pretty much did all of my questions yesterday. I don't like to do them the day before. I feel like I should have had them done well before that, but it was a busy weekend. But we managed to get it done. We've got some good questions for you today. It'll be fun. I'm already working on the Security Plus, and I just noticed I left a door open over here, and although you probably can't hear the echo, I can. It's bothering me a bit, so I'm going to step away for just a second. One moment, please. Okay. That sounds so much better already. So much better already. That's one of those that's super important for me to be able to hear. Because you really don't see it often. I have an earpiece in my left ear that you generally don't see on camera, but it's not bad if you do. And I do have, so I'm able to hear really well out of my right ear of everything else in the room. So I can always hear that echo when that door is open. And that is something I'm very sensitive about, is my audio on these live streams. So we made sure that was all fixed. If you want to, by the way, we will take your questions in the after show. So if you want to submit your questions, you can do that at any time by going to professormesser.com/QA. There's a link at the top. You can flip between answering a question and submitting a question. So that's what we're doing. Why not use a wide display rather than the 04 displays? Well, I love the wide displays. I love the wide displays, but because I am taking a mirror of this screen and putting it in the video, this is 16:9. It's a 4K, it's a 5K screen, but I save it as 4K. But I'm taking a mirror of that screen, and because of that, having the widescreen creates challenges with the production. I have a completely separate gaming setup that is outside the studio. So that's the one that I have the most fun with. So I've got a completely different system, all set up for big screens, and this is not it. So normally, you don't have these 2 screens on my left are normally not on. They are just here for streaming or for recording. When I'm recording the courses, it's just one of these. And then these 2 that are on my right they're my daily driver. They're usually much closer. They're on an arm, and I move them back when I'm not doing a live stream, but I have to push them forward and down. You can't really see it here very well, but there is a camera right there, and that's the one that I have to push it down, so you're able to do that. What's the spec for the gaming, AMD or Intel? It is an Intel platform, not an AMD. And I've had it for a while, just running. I was doing a lot with I've got an Xbox in that room. I've got a PC in that room. So I've got sort of a mix of different things going on in there. And I hardly ever get to see it. You don't have to know any Vevox codes for Vevox. It's just going to take you over to the web-based front end anyway. You just follow the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, and you're fine. That's where you will want to go. The world is killing PC gaming. Well, not where I am. There's a lot going on there. The video games are great right now. I think there's a huge mix of games you just don't hear about. But what is my favorite video game right now? Oh wait, well, enough video gaming talk. We're here talking. It's 12 noon, by the way. The chat room's like, let's talk about something else. No, let's do this. I've got a lot to go through here. It's top of the hour. It's time for a live stream. Let's see if I can set up. There's the camera there. We'll get rid of this on the screen, and let's do this, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the January 2026 Network Plus N10-009 study group. This is the study group where I ask you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives, and you get to follow along, answer online if you happen to be here live, and you'll be able to see how well everyone else answers as well. I'm Professor Messer. I will be your host for this 1 hour of Q&A, and immediately afterwards, I'll have another hour where it will be sort of a reverse Q&A. Instead of me asking the questions of you, you can ask questions of me, and you can do all of that at any time by following the links that we have available on this page that I don't have up and running because I just started the live stream and did not have my act together. So here is the live stream view that we would like to go through. All you have to do is pop open a new browser window and head over to professormesser.com/QA to be able to submit that answer. Here it is, in this case, without my background picture in it. Let's see if I can fit that background picture in. There we go. Now everything's working. We're doing great now. There's the link you want to go to, professormesser.com/QA. Those questions are there, obviously, for the people that are here live. If you're watching this on a replay, there's not much that's going to be there for you. At the time, you have to be here on a live stream to be able to see that. So you might want to check out our calendar to know when the next live stream is going to be. Now, if you go to that link, I want to put a question there for you. This will be a question that comes from a previous study group. So we call this our rewind question. This is the only question you're getting today that is a repeat. But I like to put the repeats in here so that we can see if we're able to get in and answer the questions on the live stream. We only have one rule when it comes to answering these questions. I guess we have more than one rule, but one big rule when answering these questions is please no answers in the chat room and please no hints in the chat room. We've got a lot to go through. The question here asks, a company's users are not able to seamlessly roam between two different access points. Which of the following troubleshooting tasks should be used with this issue? Should we change the wireless encryption to WPA3? Should we run a bandwidth test? Should we perform a trace route from each access point? Should we restart both access points, or should we compare configuration files between the access points? There's a number of different things in here that I would love to do with my wireless network, but only one answers the question that we have. If you think you know the answer, go to this link, professormesser.com/QA, lock in your answer. Again, please no answers in the chat room, and please no hints in the chat room. We will come back to this question in just a moment. We do one of these live streams for Network Plus every month. We're able to do this thanks to your ongoing support, so thank you so much for that. Of course, when we're not here doing a live stream, we are on our website. We're creating new content, and of course, we're on our Discord, but you can find our entire course available for free on YouTube at professormesser.com/YouTube. Of course, we're on your favorite social media sites as well. All you have to do is type in professormesser.com/ the name of the site you would like to find us on, /Facebook, /LinkedIn, /X, /whatever it is. You will find us wherever that happens to be. It's an easy way to find us, or you can use the icons that I have at the top of our website. That's another place you can go to find out where we might be. Today, this live stream is all about Network Plus, specifically the N10-009 version of Network Plus. This is the version of the exam that was released on June the 20th of 2024, which means we estimate that this exam will retire somewhere around the Q4 timeframe of 2027. What that means for you right now, as we sit here in January of 2026, is you have plenty of time to study before this version of the exam goes away. Network Plus exam is a single exam. It is 90 minutes in length. You get 90 minutes to answer a maximum of 90 questions. This is just a max. You could get fewer than 90 questions as well. And the questions themselves ultimately will give you a score. The score you're shooting for is on a scale from 100 to 900, and you would like to get a 720 on that. There's no really way to reverse engineer the scoring. So just do the best you can. Hopefully it comes out to be a 720 or better, which means you will have passed and earned your Network Plus certification. The exam itself consists of different kinds of questions. Most of the questions are multiple choice, but there are also a handful of performance-based questions at the beginning of the exam, and we'll talk in a bit on what those performance-based questions happen to be. Also let you know that on our website, not only do we have our free Network Plus course, every minute of every video is available for you to watch there. There's nothing that you have to register for. There's nothing hidden behind a paywall. Everything is just there for you to watch and available so that you can learn everything you need to know for your Network Plus exam. But of course, we have course notes. We have downloadable versions of these videos. We have them in audio format. There's so many different things to find on our site. You can learn more about those by visiting us at professormesser.com/netsuccess. Also let you know that this live stream will be available for replay immediately after we're done on our YouTube channel. We also create an audio-only version of this in a podcast format. So if you have a favorite podcast listening program, you can go to professormesser.com/podcast and add it to that. On that page, you'll find our A+, our Network Plus, and our Security Plus podcasts. So you can find plenty there to be able to add to your podcast program. It will automatically download these whenever they are available. And wherever you happen to be, if you're driving in the car, if you're working out or doing anything, you can find us and start up the latest study group, all from that one podcast app. Also let you know that if you look at our YouTube video description, usually about a day after we're done, you'll find that timestamps have been placed into the YouTube video description. This is all thanks to the hard work of my marketing manager, Lori. Hi, Lori. She's going through and watching this replay. She is putting in all of these timestamps for you. If this is something you like and something you've used, make sure you give Lori a heart there in the chat. This is something that we like doing. We've done these for years. And I get people all the time telling me I've used those to find exactly what I was looking for on the replays and be able to find the information that I need. So thank you, Lori, for doing this, and everyone else thanks you as well. We also have this chat available when we are not on the live stream in the YouTube chat. We are in our Discord chat. You can go to professormesser.com/Discord. That's a great place to go to keep up with what we're doing. That's usually where I'm hanging out once we're done with this live stream. It's a great place to go and find other people who are studying for their A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, and other certifications. There are thousands of people that have registered to our Discord server. We thank you so much for that support. And other people that are there studying also thank you for that support, because it really helps them a lot more than it's helping us. And that was the intention, is to create a nice community there that we could all learn from each other and do even better on these exams. You can find that out at professormesser.com/Discord. Eventually, you will need to take your exam. You could certainly go to the CompTIA website and pay full price, but if you happen to be in the U.S. or Canada or U.S. territory, you can get a discount off of your vouchers, so you're not paying full price. That discount is automatically built into these pages at professormesser.com/vouchers. You don't need a special code. You don't have to load anything into your browser. There's no extra work you have to do. The price on the screen is simply discounted from the price that you would normally pay on the CompTIA site. Not only do you get your voucher for less, I'll give you something that you don't get anywhere else, and that's a copy of my CompTIA Exam Hacks ebook, where I've taken a lot of the questions, the challenges, the tips and tricks that I've accumulated through the years, and I put them into this document. Somebody was mentioning earlier that they don't see the point in that because all it does is tell you to drink water. Like, I think that's not something we really need to put in a book. I think you know to drink water. So I don't have any tips like that. These are legitimate tips, in many cases strategies you can use during the exam that might help you get a few extra points. There are things you can do during your exam that will help you quite a bit with that final score, and I want you to have the right strategy when you walk into the room. You can find out more about that at professormesser.com/vouchers. Keep in mind, the Exam Hacks is not for sale. You are only able to get the Exam Hacks ebook with the purchase of a voucher or purchase of one of our success bundles. So I want to thank you so much for your support of these vouchers as well. Let's go back to that question I asked earlier. The question is, a company's users are not able to seamlessly roam between two access points. Which of the following troubleshooting tasks should be used with this issue? Would it be change the wireless encryption to WPA3, run a bandwidth test, perform a trace route from each access point, restart both access points, or compare configuration files between access points? Let's find out what you answered. I'm going to stop our poll. We will compile the results, and we can see that a majority of you, 54% of you, say the answer is to compare configuration files between access points. But still, a large number of you, 24%, say you should perform a trace route from each access point. And then we have single digits. 9% said run a bandwidth test. 8% said to restart both access points. And 5% said to change the wireless encryption to WPA3. Shouldn't that always be the answer, though? Change the wireless encryption? In this case, changing the wireless encryption is not going to help you very much. The answer here is the one that the majority of you chose. 54% said to compare the configuration files between these access points. The problem that is described in this question, a company's users not able to seamlessly roam between two access points, is the problem we're trying to solve. It is a roaming misconfiguration. This is something we often take in really for granted because we don't see it happening when we're moving our mobile device from one side of the building to the other. You just are always connected to the wireless network. You didn't have to re-authenticate. You didn't have to change to a different access point or different SSID. So instead, you have what effectively looks like one big wireless network. But this one big wireless network really consists of multiple access points. Normally, there might be a single access point. We refer to the hardware address of that access point as a basic service set identifier, or a BSSID. And the name of the wireless network, the one you often see when you use the pull-down menu in your in your operating system or in your application, that operating system will show you the wireless networks, and the wireless network name is referred to as a service set identifier, or an SSID. The idea is that we want to extend this from one place to the other. We need to make sure that if we are not able to roam from one access point to another as we're moving from one part of the network to the other, that we need to make sure that we have exactly the same configuration. These must have identical configuration so that people are able to move seamlessly from one access point to the other. Otherwise, you're going to be dropped from the wireless network and prompted to reconnect. So that's exactly the answer we were looking for, is to compare the configuration files between access points, because something is not working properly if they are not able to seamlessly move or roam between two access points. That is exactly where we would like to be with this. It would not be to perform a trace route from each access point. The problem is not that we're not able to communicate to a particular website because our router may not be working properly. We're not even routing at this point. We are simply trying to roam between two access points that are in close proximity to each other, and therefore it would not be a problem with trace route. It would also not be a problem with bandwidth. That's not the reason that we're not able to roam. Obviously, there is a question. We are always concerned about bandwidth. It's one of our first concerns. But when you're talking about a type of network where the access points are in the same building, generally bandwidth is not our major issue. So another thing to think about as you are working through the details of these questions, that you have to think about why you would run a particular task. We also have restarting both access points. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Have you turned them off and turned them back on again? In this case, that would not have caused our problem because the issue is not related to some type of bug in the access point software. The problem, why did I call it a bug? It was a bug in the access point software. We have two different access points that are in our building. The problem is a configuration issue. Restarting them will simply restart the same configuration problems we had previously. And lastly, changing the wireless network to encryption WPA3 is always a good best practice, but changing the wireless encryption type doesn't change the ability to move between different access points. So that's one of those that in this case, the best possible answer would be to look at those configuration files, determine where the differences are, and then make sure both of those access points are configured with the identical settings. That is the answer we wanted. 54% of you got that one absolutely correct. Well done. That is the answer that we were hoping you would choose. And that's the answer that we were looking for from our previous study groups as well. I think you did a little bit better on this one than you did our previous study group. So good job with that. Well, that was our test question, our starter question, our rewind question, so that you're able to make sure that you're accessing and answering the questions that we put online for you. What I'd like to do now is have some new questions, but as many of you know, our first new question of the study group is a performance-based question. I talked about performance-based questions earlier, and that on your exam, the bulk of the exam will be multiple choice questions, but at the very beginning of your exam will be a series, usually about a handful of questions that are performance-based questions. Performance-based questions are effectively anything but multiple choice. It could be any style of question that CompTIA presents. It could be in any format. It could be asking you information in a different way. It's just anything but multiple choice. So this might be fill in the blank. It might be a drag and drop question. It might be a question where they put you at a command prompt and ask you to perform a function. It might be putting things in a particular order or a particular ranking. These are all different ways to ask questions, but always keep in mind that the performance-based questions will always be asking you about topics that you already know about because those topics are contained in the official CompTIA exam objectives. So in my mind, as long as you know the objectives, it really doesn't matter how they ask the question. You will be able to answer this question. So I have for you today a performance-based question. Somebody was mentioning this to me before, and I wanted to go through and have a good understanding of this specific topic, which for those of you listening on the podcast side, this is more of a visual topic. So I apologize that we will not have the visual part of this available for the podcast. But on the screen are 4 different connector types, and I want you to name the connectors. That's what we're going to go with there. Name those connectors. Now, if you want to submit your answer, you don't need any special IDs. You don't need anything extra. Just follow the link at the bottom of your screen and go to professormesser.com/QA to answer this particular question. We have 4 different connectors: connector A, connector B, connector C, and connector D. Really 2 connectors on B. It's the same connector. So I want you to tell me what these are. Notice that I did not give you a list of connectors to match it with. So this is not a matching question. This is more of a fill-in-the-blank question because I'm not prompting you for these specific connector names. You have to remember what these connectors are and assign them. Admittedly, the Network Plus exam to this point, as we sit here in January of 2026, has not provided any type of fill-in-the-blank questions on their exams. So in many ways, this is a question that's a little bit harder than what you would get on this exam. So make sure you are familiar with these connector types. You do need to know the names. You do need to recognize them by sight. And in many cases, you need to be able to tell somebody, oh, this is the connector type. This is the type of cable or fiber that we are going to need. This is one on these that there is a similarity. There's a theme, if you will, with today's question. Maybe you have seen what the theme happens to be. I suspect some of you have, and we will go through this and figure out the details of it. If you think you know the answers, please no answers in the chat room. Instead, go to the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your answer. See if you know what this one is. Visually understanding connector types seems like it's something that we should be able to do relatively easily. And I think that's probably true, but you first have to know them. And the only way to really get familiar with this is to see the images. And in some cases, see the images not just of the connector that I'm showing here, but the connection on the device that you would be plugging into. So it might be useful to have both of those and associate with the ones that are on this particular screen. 4 different connector types. Hopefully these are ones that you are familiar with, but this may be a little more difficult because I don't want to give you too many hints, but we don't tend to see a lot of these types of connectors in our home. This would really be something we would commonly see in a much larger environment. I know that doesn't help very much at all answering the question, but at least it gives you a little bit of context of where we would go with this particular question. We've got a number of answers that have come in. A number of you have submitted your answers into this list. Let's see if I can see how many have some. We got a good number of people have submitted. So let's step through these one at a time and see if we happen to know what these connectors happen to be. We'll start with the very first one in the upper left. This connector that is here seems like a relatively small connector. It's got a couple of locking pieces on the top, and it looks like it's two of them that are sort of combined together into a single connector, which is not entirely unusual to have these available. This is a local connector. LC is the local connector. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as a lucent connector. We have different names for these, but it is a fiber optic connector type. You can see the fiber optic ferrule is on the outside of this. It's this tiny little, let me zoom up a little bit. Here we go. There's the ferrule that's there. Inside of that protective ferrule is the fiber itself. It's very tiny, and it's on the inside of that piece. So that is definitely fiber optic, and we refer to that often as the local connector. That's how it is referred to in your official CompTIA exam objectives. So that's how I'm referring it here as well, which is pretty much what we call it. Normally, we don't even give the name when we're talking about these. Hey, what type of fiber you need? Got an LC? I need an LC fiber on there, and we almost don't even remember what those names refer to. Next on our list, this one that's got a little bit of a longer ferrule associated with it. And if you look closely, it seems to have the a connector type, a locking connector type on there. This is the straight tip type of fiber connection. This has been around for quite some time. It's a very common fiber connection, but it's a relatively large fiber connector. It does have this bayonet style connector on it where you put it into the interface and you twist just a little bit and it locks it in place. So it's not going to pop out. A little bit different type of locking connector on the LC. LC has these little clips on the top. So to remove it, you push down on the clips and it pops out of the connection. This is a different style that's you're putting it in and twisting to be able to lock it in place. So those are the first two. Again, a fiber connector. We're starting to see a trend here between the local connector and the straight tip. The straight tip, you can't see it here, but it's a little bit larger than the LC connector. We can fit a lot more LC in the same real estate rather than dealing with the straight tip, which is one of the benefits there. Third on our list, the next connector that we have, another fiber connector. This connector is the subscriber connector, or SC connector. SC connectors are also referred to as square connectors, not the official name, but we call it that because it is kind of square, isn't it? It's got a little bit of a square to it. It also has a locking mechanism built into the outside of this connector. You can only plug it in one way. It has a little key at the top, so it has to plug in with the same key on the device that you're connecting. And when you plug it in, it snaps in place. This is a little two-piece spring-loaded connection, so you have to pull back on this connector to release it from the connection, and then it comes right back out from that list. So you have different options that we can work through, but subscriber connectors are very common. I think the ONT that I have for this network coming from my fiber provider is one that has a subscriber connector on it. So they're coming in on my connection to my home with an SC connector that I'm then plugging into an ONT that is in my home. So another way to see how these SC connectors are relatively common and how they work. And the last connector, well, if this one's fiber and this one's fiber and that one's fiber, guess what? That one's fiber too. This is a multi-fiber push-on, an MPO connector. And one of the benefits of the MPO connector is that it has a large number of fibers in the end of this connector. I don't know if we can even see it here. It's difficult to see. You can almost see the little dots that are on this screen. We'll go even deeper. There we go. Look at the tiny little dots that are in the middle of this. Those are 12 different fibers that are in a single connector. A lot of density there. A lot of good to be able to have that there. But those types of fiber connections are obviously ones that you would use on a much more higher density connection. So this is one where if you are connecting two different racks in your data center, instead of running 12 individual fiber runs, 12 individual straight tip connectors, maybe 6 individual LC pairs. That would be 12 different fibers or 12 different SC connectors. Instead, you can run, well, we'll come back to that one in a moment. Instead, you'll run a single connection with the MPO, plug it in, and now you've got 12 fibers that are connected on that link. So it makes it very easy to extend multiple fibers with one connector onto a device. It can be pretty useful to have there. You don't see a lot of MPO out there, but when you do use it, it comes in super handy. So those were the connectors we were looking for, all fiber connectors. In fact, these are the only fiber connectors you need to know for the Network Plus exam. So this is a pretty extensive one to be able to have. The LC, the ST, the SC, and the MPO, which would be our local connector, our straight tip, our subscriber connector, and the multi-fiber push-on. Those are the ones that we would use to be able to plug in fiber. These are the ones that you would most commonly use with a fiber. These are not the only fiber connectors that are out there in the world, but these are 4 of the most, really the most popular you will run into. There are a couple of other styles that you'll run into, but nothing else that you need to know for the Network Plus exam. If you know these 4, then you know all of the fiber connectors you must know to be able to pass your Network Plus exam. So it might be pretty useful for that. That was our performance-based question of the month. Hopefully you did pretty well on that one. Let's now shift gears and get back to our multiple choice questions. You've already seen a preview of this one, haven't you? This next question is multiple choice, so we will be selecting from a list of different options. The question asks, a network administrator is checking the availability of an IP address range on the internal network. Which of the following protocols is most likely associated with this task? Would it be AH, SIP, IKE, ICMP, or SMB? Now, some of these I am intentionally spelling them out, which is not how we normally describe these. But if you think you know the answer, go to the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your answer. See how well you do with this. The question again asks, a network administrator is checking the availability of an IP address range on the internal network. Which of the following protocols is most likely associated with this task? Is it AH, SIP, IKE, ICMP, or SMB? There are obviously protocols we need to know on the Network Plus exam. That big list of protocols is in the official exam objectives. But one thing that's important with these, I see a lot of people that focus on just memorizing the abbreviation and a port number. But very often these protocols are referenced in how they are deployed, how they are used, how the technology helps us. So understanding how that protocol is used on a network is often at least as important as knowing what the port number happens to be. So this is definitely one of those questions asking you how things work rather than what things are. And I think a lot of the exam itself does focus on how things work. It tends to be a trend on these CompTIA exams. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, a network administrator is checking the availability of an IP address range on the internal network. Which of the following protocols is most likely associated with this task? Is it AH, SIP, or SIP, IKE, or IKE, ICMP, or SMB? What did you choose? Let's find out. We'll stop our poll. Almost 70% of you, a large number of you, a huge chunk of this pie say the answer is ICMP. I wonder if this is one of these where we all went one direction and we probably should have gone another, because 16% of you say the answer is SIP, to be able to have that there. So a few different options to focus on. Everything else is single digit. 6% said IKE, 4% said AH, and 5% say SMB. Well, we had almost a huge number. A majority did definitely say the answer in their mind is ICMP. And if you're doing anything with network management and the way that it works with network management, then you probably are looking at the Internet Control Message Protocol, ICMP. In fact, if you are working with the ping command, which is a good example here, somebody checking the availability of an IP address range, checking that availability means you have to run some type of application. What application are we going to run? That sounds like a ping. Could also be a trace route, but I think in most cases, checking the availability of an IP address range is probably a ping that you would use. And you do need to know that the ping command uses the Internet Control Message Protocol by default. This is one that when you send a request to a device, you're hoping to receive a reply from that device. All of that is handled with the ICMP protocol. And if you are trying to send a message to an IP address and the IP address is not there, then you're obviously going to get a message saying that we're not able to communicate to a device on that subnet. Or if there's a loop on the network, an IP loop, a routing loop, then you may get a message back saying your time to live has expired. There's a lot that we talk about with traceroute and time to live. So if you want to know more about that, you can always check out that video. This is in a video in section 1.4 called Other Useful Protocols, where you learn all about ICMP. And in fact, you knew all about ICMP. You knew that was the answer we were looking for. And those of you that answered ICMP got that absolutely correct. Now, what about all these other protocols? These other protocols are taken directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. SIP, or the Session Initiation Protocol, that is a protocol commonly associated with voice over IP. It's a signaling protocol used for VoIP. So when you pick up your voice over IP telephone and you dial a number, that process of connecting to the device on the other end of that phone line uses SIP to be able to send that signaling information. We have 6% of you that said IKE and 4% that said AH. The authentication headers and the key exchange mechanisms are commonly associated with setting up an IPsec VPN. So it would not be associated with finding an IP address range on the internal network. And lastly, we have SMB, the server message block. That is a protocol that we commonly associate these days with Windows. That's what Windows uses to be able to transfer files between devices or shares. It's also used for printing over a Microsoft network. Microsoft uses a lot of server message block, but server message block is not used to check the availability of an IP address range. So not something that you would commonly see associated with any of these protocols, except for ICMP. Internet Control Message Protocol is exactly the one that you would use for this type of connection. Well done. You did great with that question. Let's see how you do with this next one then. Next on our list is this question that asks, a router has received dynamic routing updates containing the same destination subnet from two different routing protocols. Which of the following determines the best route to use? Would that be the timestamp of the last received route? Would it be randomly selected by the router OS? Would it be the highest sequence number? Would it be the update source with the lowest IP address value? Or would it be the one with the lowest administrative distance? Got a few options to choose from there. If you think you know what the answer is, go to the link on our screen, professormesser.com/QA, and lock in your answer. The question again asks, a router has received dynamic routing updates containing the same destination subnet from two different routing protocols. Which of the following determines the best route to use? Is it the timestamp of the last received route? Is it randomly selected by the router OS? Is it the highest sequence number? Is it the update source with the lowest IP address value? Or is it the lowest administrative distance? You think you know the answer? Go to this link right here on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your answer. As always, please, no answers in the chat room. Please, no hints in the chat room. Just follow that link. You can put all of your answers in right on that link. That is the best place to go, professormesser.com/QA. See if you know what this answer is. Understanding routing tables, understanding dynamic routing updates, and understanding what to do when there's a tie is an important part of the exam objectives. Make sure you are familiar with these. It may be something that does pop up on your exam. Being able to read a routing table is a valuable skill, not just for this exam, but in general, if you get into networking. A lot of problems we run into, and especially when we're plugging in new equipment or we're designing a network and we're implementing that design, interestingly enough, a huge number of the problems we run into are simple routing problems. And we're able to ping a device, we send a ping, but we don't get a response. But we know the network is working. Why isn't that working properly? It's probably a routing issue. So we run into that type of problem all the time with things like that. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, a router has received dynamic routing updates containing the same destination subnet from two different routing protocols. Which of the following determines the best route to use? Is it the timestamp of the last received route? Is it randomly selected by the router OS? Is it the highest sequence number? Is it the update source with the lowest IP address value? Or is it the lowest administrative distance? I have to say, I'm really interested to see what this answer is. I've not peeked yet, so let's close the poll and see what the answers are. We did pretty good, I think, at least if this turns out to be the right answer, because 61% say it is the lowest administrative distance. We do have a couple of double digits. 16% said it's the timestamp of the last received route, and 10% say it's the highest sequence number. Only 8% said it was the update source with the lowest IP address value, and 5% said it's random. The router decides randomly which one we would use for something like this. Well, we had a large number, 61% say that it's the lowest administrative distance, and that indeed is the answer that we were looking for. It is the lowest administrative distance, but what is that? What are you talking about? An administrative distance? Well, this is a value that we associate with a specific type of routing protocol. In this particular case, it's a lot like golf. The lower number you have is really good. So something like if you are locally connected, your administrative distance is 0. I mean, you're right there. You really don't need a route to get there. In fact, most routers automatically put routes into the routing table for networks that are directly connected to the router. That's just a common thing. So if you put no routes in the router, no static routes, and you didn't have any type of dynamic routing, so nothing else was being updated with the routing table, you would at a minimum have a routing table that showed the directly connected routes on that particular router. But if you added your own route, you manually administratively added a static route, that has a very low administrative distance. It's not as good as one that is directly connected to the router, but it has an administrative distance of 1. So if you had the same static route as one that existed locally on that device, it would always go to the local route to determine which way to go. And as you can see, other routing protocols have different administrative distances by default. These administrative distances can be modified by the network administrator, but very commonly they are not. And to be fair, there are not a lot of networks out there that are running multiple dynamic routing protocols on a single link, but they absolutely exist. So there needs to be a way to determine if you get a routing update that came in with EIGRP and you get a routing update that came in with OSPF, and both of those updates contain the same IP destination network, which one do you choose? You have to be able to make a decision. You now have two different places. Maybe one says to go one direction, one says to go the other. Which one do you choose? That's your real problem. So that is why we have administrative distances. The lower administrative distance wins. So if one came in with EIGRP and another route came in with OSPF and they were the same route, we would choose to the EIGRP route because it had a lower administrative distance. And if you manually put in a static route, it wouldn't matter what OSPF told you, and it wouldn't matter what EIGRP told you. You would use static route because it has an administrative distance of 1. It wins in that particular case. So that was the goal with administrative distances, is deciding which one do we choose. And of course, you can see that 61% of you say, yep, that's what we would use the administrative distance for. 16% of you said you would use the timestamp of the last received route. That would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? Because then the people that are setting up the routing protocols would set it up to update every second, so that it was always the most recent route. You imagine if two were set up so that every second it would send out its own route, and then you'd have both of them competing on which way to go, and it would be changing every second on which. That's why we don't use a timestamp to determine the best way to send a route. We also don't use the update source with the lowest IP address value. IP address values are not something we have a lot of control over most of the time. They're already predefined. They're already coming from a place. And just because your IP address starts with a particular value doesn't mean that it's a better route to take. So it would not be the update source with the lowest IP address value. We really don't do that when deciding to choose which route to use either. That would be a mess to be able to work through. It's also probably not surprising. It's not randomly selected by the router operating system. You would think there might be some randomization associated with this, maybe even kind of a load balancing thing that we do. And there are some routing protocols out there that could potentially have multiple routes to the same destination and balance the load across both of them. That is something that's very OSPF-ish, and that's not something that we're dealing with in our Network Plus exam. So thankfully, not something we have to worry about. Not randomly selected by the router OS, and we're not leaving it up to chance whenever we're deciding which is the best route. This is a pretty important piece of your router. Effectively, it's the core function of your router, is determining how to get to a particular network. That's all your router is there for. Why would you have it randomize that? So it would not be the answer we were looking for. The answer we wanted was the lowest administrative distance. 61% of you chose that option, and that is exactly the answer that we were looking for. Well done. As you can tell, we've already been talking about a ton of different technologies. We've talked about port numbers and protocols. We've talked about connecting to networks and be able to go from one wireless network to the other. And we've talked about routing updates. And of course, Network Plus includes so much more than that. There is an extensive amount of technologies we need to know. In fact, there are 87 total videos in our Network Plus course containing over 12 hours of content. That is quite a bit of information. And you can see that we include everything that's in the exam objectives as part of our course. And therefore, we include everything that's in the exam objectives that is part of our course notes. Our course notes is a way that you can take everything that's in these videos, all of the text, all of the important graphics, all of the tables, and we put them in one place. This is a PDF version of my course notes. We have a complete table of contents in the front, and all of this, of course, is dynamic. You can move directly to the thing that you would like to find. For example, if you want to learn about network address translation, we just click on it, and we go directly to the section on network address translation, which also, by the way, has our routing technologies here as well, which includes administrative distances. There's the information directly from our video that describes that piece. And of course, you could read through anything else that happens to be in this set of course notes. They are all available inside of that PDF. Not only is there a PDF version, that's our digital edition, we also have the physical edition. This is an identical version of the PDF. Has the same information, but it's in a printed form, something that you can carry around with you in a traditional softback printed form. It's all colored, nice glossy piece on the front, high quality to be able to have that there. And if you get the physical edition, you obviously will have this shipped to you. While you're waiting for it to ship, you get full and complete access to the digital edition for free. So you can download that immediately, start working through the digital edition, and then when you get your physical book, you'll be able to take that anywhere. And of course, you can continue to use that digital edition. Just a nice little bonus thrown in for those of you that are getting the physical edition of the course notes. If you'd like to learn more about our course notes, you can find it on our website. Go to professormesser.com/NPCN to be able to find and look through the course notes that are there. We also have a nice video where we describe a little bit more of them. Plenty more to go through inside of that link at professormesser.com/NPCN. And for those of you that have already purchased the course notes, thank you so much for your support with these as well. Let's do another question on our list. This question is one that asks, an internal DNS server has resolved the FQDN of vpn.professormesser.com to 10.10.117.23. I got too many 10s here. We're doing this on the fly, people. It actually has, I got a little bit involved when I was typing this one in, wasn't I? That's a better IP address. Suddenly I was in a movie where nobody had IP addresses that made any sense. We're back to reality. An internal DNS server has resolved the FQDN of vpn.professormesser.com to 10.117.23.44. Obviously, I can't change this over on the Vevox side, so you'll still see my mistake there. What DNS record was used to provide this resolution of between vpn.professormesser.com to 10.10.117 or 10.117.23.44? Which one would that be? And the answer will either be MX, NS, A, SOA, or CNAME. We got a few there to choose from. Those are the ones that we will be working through. Now, if you think you know the answer, follow the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. Instead, you want to go to that link that you see right here. There it is, professormesser.com/QA. I can't put my mouse over it because it's actually on top of my mouse. It's actually on top of the screen. So I put it right here on the top, professormesser.com/QA. I'll circle it on the screen. It's that one there. It's that one at the bottom. It's the only link you can see on your screen right now. That's the one you would choose. I guess technically not the only link. I still have this Vevox link over here, which doesn't really apply to what we're doing because that professormesser.com/QA takes you directly to all of that nonsense that you see over here. So you don't have to know any IDs. You don't have to know any numbers. You simply go to the link and break down what you think the answer happens to be. Let's see, you DNS people, if you know what this one happens to be. There are obviously a lot of DNS records we need to know for the Network Plus exam, and this is one of those. The question asks, an internal DNS server has resolved the FQDN of vpn.professormesser.com to 10.117.23.44. What DNS record was used to provide this resolution? Is it MX, NS, A, SOA, or CNAME, or something else? No, I think it's in this list. Let's see what you think the answer is. We'll close our poll and we'll have a look. And almost a majority of you think the answer is an A record to be able to provide that information. But 27% of you say the answer is a CNAME record is what you would choose for that. And then we also have 15% that say it's an NS record. Then we get in single digits. 5% say MX. 4% say SOA. The records that are in a DNS server are so important. I often tell people we often make that joke in the world of IT that, oh, you're having a problem? It's DNS. That's just the natural response we have when somebody says there's a type of problem. The issue, of course, that a lot of the times it is DNS. That is our problem. So it's a very funny thing that actually has a pretty strong grounding in truth. So even if you don't think it's DNS, it might even still be DNS. It's one of those situations, being able to work through those. We also have a number of different records in our DNS server that we need to choose from. And the one that we were hoping to get in this case was the one that 49% of you chose, which is the A record. That's the record that we were hoping to find. That is referred to as the address record. There are two different types of address records in a DNS server. There is the A record. This refers to the IP address that is associated with a fully qualified domain name. That's an FQDN. And then we have the quad A record. AAAA, quad A record, is for IP version 6 address resolution. So we separate those out into different types of addresses because you could have a single device that has both. It has an IPv4 address and it has an IPv6 address. In fact, I would say most of our devices these days are set up that way. So you need separate records in your DNS server to be able to do that as well. This is the one that is used to provide that resolution that when you have the name of a server, like www.professormesser.com, like vpn.professormesser.com, mail.professormesser.com, ftp.professormesser.com, you get the idea. Those are fully qualified domain names. They list out the entire name of that service. And when you type into a browser, www.professormesser.com, how does it find the IP address? How does it know where to go? Well, it does a lookup of the A record so that it's able to find that information and be able to help you understand what the different option might be for being able to use or find that particular device based on the fully qualified domain name. This is probably the most common lookup that we have on a DNS server. Here's what it looks like on the DNS server configuration itself. It starts with the fully qualified domain name, in this case, www.professormesser.com. It specifies that it is an internet address and it is an A record. It is an address record. And this fully qualified domain name resolves to an IP address of 162.159.246.164. There's even a comment that is associated with this line in the DNS server that just is a comment that says, oh, that's Professor Messer. I'm not sure we really needed a comment there to be able to explain what that was, but you can put anything in for the comment to be able to work through that piece of it. DNS is a very useful and very important service that we run on our network, so it's important to know what these different records are referring to. There are a number of other records in this list, and all of these are in the CompTIA exam objectives, and there are even more in the objectives than what I am showing here. 27% of you said it's the canonical name reference, the CNAME record in a DNS server. Canonical names are used to be able to have different names for the same server. So a single server might be your mail server, your FTP server, and your web server. You can have CNAME records that are referring back to the original name of that device, but a CNAME record does not have an IP address associated with it. It refers back to another FQDN. So the CNAME record would not be able to resolve vpn.professormesser.com to a single IP address. It would need to be able to find the name of what we are referencing as part of the canonical lookup and then perform a separate DNS query for the IP address of the canonical name's reference. So there's multiple steps when you have a CNAME, but you have to do that. The CNAME record itself does not have an IP address to be able, so you must go through that multiple steps to do that. 15% of you said it's the NS record. That's a name server record. This is a record that is queried to find out where the name server is for a domain. This is something that is incredibly important. If you mess up your NS record, nobody can find you. This is why it's important when you're making a change to a DNS server that you know exactly what change you are making. Because if you make the wrong change to the wrong record, everybody is now not going to be able to access your service. That's a problem. So NS is very useful for finding the IP address of a name server, but it does not do a resolution from a fully qualified domain name to an IP address. So not what we would be using in that case either. We have 5% that said it's an MX record. MX is a mail exchange record. Obviously be part of an exchange that is occurring to be able to send mail from one device to another. How do you know where a mail server is for ProfessorMesser.com? You query my DNS server, and I send you the information that is contained in my MX record. That's for email, has nothing to do with resolving a fully qualified domain name to an IP address. And lastly, 4% of you said an SOA record. The start of authority record is usually the very first record that's in a DNS configuration, and it sets some broad global parameters for how the DNS server should perform. It's not associated with the resolution process between a fully qualified domain name and an IP address, however, so it would not be the SOA record. So there's the answer we were looking for, was the A record. Some people said, well, what if the vpn.professormesser.com was the CNAME record? Well, let's say that it was. That would then point to a different name. Maybe vpn.professormesser.com points to www.professormesser.com because it's on the web server. That is the name of that single server. So all a CNAME does is tell us it's not this name, it's that name. At that point, you would have to perform another DNS lookup to say, okay, so if it's on www.professormesser.com, what IP address is that? Oh, well, let's go to the A record, and I'll tell you that it's 10.117.23.44. So ultimately, it's the A record that provides that resolution. It is not CNAME. It is not SOA. It's not NSMX or anything else. It is the A record, and 49% of you got that one absolutely correct. If you are watching this video for continuing education unit credit, I would love to send you an email that certifies that you were here for a 1-hour webinar category CEU. The way that you would earn that email is you must follow these instructions. You go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, you click the Contact Us link. In that Contact Us link, put your name, your email address. On the subject line of this message, please put January 2026 Network Plus. And then in the body of the message, on a line all by itself with no other text on that line at all, the single words on that line would be A, SOA, CNAME. Those are your super secret code words of the month. Not so super secret now. I just told you what they were, but you're the only ones that know because you are here or you're watching this. This will work whether you're watching this live or watching it on a replay. Send me that message, and in about a week or so, you'll receive an email from me that is digitally signed that certifies that you were here for a 1-hour webinar category, Continuing Education Unit Credit, or CEU. Again, that process, we rewind. The process is you go to professormesser.com. In the top or the bottom of the website, click the Contact Us link. When that pops up a form, put in your name, your email address. In the subject line, put January 2026 Network Plus. In the body of the message, put the super secret code words of the month, ASOA, CNAME. That's what we're looking for. And you simply send that to me, and then I sit on it for a week, wondering when I'm going to get the work done that I need to get done. And then I finally send it back to you. Hopefully it'll be faster than that. I've been doing pretty well lately. Trying to do better in 2026, so I get it to you in less than a week. How about that? We'll make that happen. That's one way to do it, and that will earn you a 1-hour webinar category CEU. We have time for one more question, so let's fit it in this first hour. This next question on this list is, the forwarding table on a switch has filled, and all traffic is now seen by all switch interfaces. Which of the following would best describe this attack type? Would it be MAC flooding, denial of service, VLAN hopping, on-path attack, or DNS poisoning? Got a few options here to choose from. If you think you know the answer, follow the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. The question again asks, the forwarding table on a switch is filled, and all traffic is now seen by all switch interfaces. Which of the following would best describe this attack type? Is it MAC flooding, denial of service, VLAN hopping, on-path attack, or DNS poisoning? Lock in your answer. Go to professormesser.com/QA. Tell me what you think the answer might be. This would be a good one. Security, of course, is an entire domain of the Network Plus exam, just as it is for A+. And obviously for Security Plus, it's the entire exam itself. But these are the types of attacks that you would find. All 5 of these attack types are things you should know for Network Plus. These come directly from the exam objectives. So if you know the answer, make sure you look at the other answers as well. Make sure you know what those are referring to as well. What would those attacks look like if you saw someone performing that attack? What would that do? Those are important things to know, not just for Network Plus. That will help you really throughout your career and perhaps with other certification exams that you might take. Let's see how you did with this one. A lot of answers came in quick on this one, so I'm thinking good thoughts about the answers for this one. The question asks, the forwarding table on a switch is filled, and all traffic is now seen by all switch interfaces. Which of the following would best describe this attack type? Is it MAC flooding, denial of service, VLAN hopping, on-path attack, or DNS poisoning? We will stop our poll. It's all closed up. Let's see how you did. Big numbers. Are they right? We're going to find out. 79% of you say the answer is MAC flooding. I didn't talk about Macintosh in here at all. I don't know what that was about. 12% of you said denial of service, and then it drops to single digits. 5% for VLAN hopping, 3% for on-path attack, and 2% for DNS poisoning. This is a relatively common attack type. This is one that is useful because when you get into the details of understanding how switches operate, you know that they rely on a forwarding table that is associating a MAC address with an interface that is on the switch. And there's only so much room in the forwarding table. That forwarding table might have 256 entries. It might have 2,000 entries. It might have 10,000 entries in it maximum. And what attackers will do is they will fill up that particular forwarding table by just sending in lots of traffic from different MAC addresses that have been programmatically created. They aren't even real MAC addresses. They're just sending in a bunch because they know they're going to sit in that forwarding table for a certain amount of time before they are thrown out. And they know if they fill up the forwarding table, the switch effectively turns into a hub where anything that's inbound to the switch is sent outbound on every interface because it has filled the forwarding table and it knows that it can't reliably forward traffic any longer. So it just forwards to every interface all at the same time. This is an easy way for an attacker to be able to capture packets that may not be directed to the attacker, because now you've turned your switch into a hub. You see all traffic from all interfaces on that switch. That might be an overwhelming amount of traffic, but usually your attacker is capturing these frames as they are coming through and storing them to be able to look at them later. There's probably some good information in a lot of these frames, and that was the purpose of doing this to begin with. That process we refer to as MAC flooding, because we are flooding that switch with a lot of made up MAC addresses and filling up that particular resource. That is one that becomes an issue, because now we have to be able to prevent this from occurring. There are ways to prevent attackers from filling up your table, your forwarding table of your switch, but that is one that would allow your attacker to see everything. It is quite a nasty little problem to be able to deal with, but you knew that. You knew that 79% of you knew that, and were able to say, yep, MAC flooding is the answer that we were looking for in that particular case. It would not be a denial of service. It sounds like we're filling up this particular table, therefore we're breaking the switch. It's sort of like an escalator that loses power. It's not broken. We could still use it as stairs. And it's the similar scenario here. We didn't break the switch. We're now simply using it as a hub. So there was no service denied. There was only efficiency denied. We're making a much less efficient switch, but we still are up and running. And if we have relatively low bandwidths, you may not even realize this is happening, because you have just the ability to now flood the network and see every packet from every interface. We have 5% that said VLAN hopping. We're not moving from one VLAN to another in a way that would be unauthorized. We're simply filling up the forwarding table, and that is turning our switch effectively into a hub. So VLAN hopping would not be the answer we were looking for. It's also not an on-path attack. Some people think of this as a man-in-the-middle attack. It's the same name, different names for the same thing. On-path attacks, you don't have to sit in the middle once this is done. This interface, the switch interface that has now been flooded, doesn't require anybody to be in the middle. We just have to be on one side of the switch, flooding it with information, and we're able to take advantage of that. And we're looking at it as well. And DNS poisoning is commonly associated with changing the value or the responses from a DNS server. Has nothing to do with the forwarding table on an individual switch. The only answer here that makes any sense, the one that is the correct answer, the one that we decided on, and the one that 79% of you chose, is MAC flooding. That is the answer that we wanted, and that does best describe that scenario of someone filling up the forwarding table and making all of that turn into now one big mess that is sending traffic to all interfaces instead of a single directed interface, which after all is what we rely on switches to be able to do. It's one of the value propositions for a switch. It's why we no longer use hubs, because switches are so much more efficient in how they work and how they use the bandwidth. Well, that is the answer, and you guys did great with that one. 79% of you got that one absolutely correct. As I mentioned earlier, all of the questions that we went through today came directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. This is a valuable document that unfortunately I see people are not using enough of this document. It lists everything you need to know for this exam. I highly recommend that you download and read through this before you start your studies. You can download it. I have links that will take you right to the objective pages at professormesser.com/objectives. I also have an instruction on the screen of where you go on that directed page to be able to download and use those. I'll show you that in just a moment. Once you have the objectives, you can then parse through them, look at all of the different things you need to know. For example, section 1.1, explain concepts related to the Open Systems Connection. The OSI reference model has a list of all of those different layers. You have to understand what the concepts are with each individual layer. Section 1.2 is compare and contrast networking appliances, applications, and functions. This would be routers, switches, firewalls, IDS, IPS, load balancers, proxies, NAS, SAN, wireless access points, wireless controllers, content delivery network, virtual private network, quality of service, and time to live. There's a lot there that you would, just for that single section 1.2, that you would be able to parse through. You need to know everything that's in that list. And that's just the beginning of what you need to know. There are pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of this information that we would need to know. Make sure you are familiar with everything that is in these exam objectives. It is incredibly important document. And if you're not using it, you are already at a disadvantage. By the way, the objectives document, it's free. You don't even need to download anything but this to know exactly what would be listed in your exam, and there was no cost to obtain it. Find out more at professormesser.com/objectives. We do one of these study groups every month. We've already scheduled the one for February. In fact, we've changed the date for our February Network Plus study group. So make a note of our date change. It is now going to be on Friday, the 13th of February. That is when we are doing our next Network Plus study group. These dates can sometimes change, and they can change unexpectedly. We originally had this for February 11th. Now we've got this set for February the 13th. One way that you can always keep track of when the latest date is, especially because things sometimes will change dramatically on my side of the camera, you can always go to professormesser.com/calendar. This is where I update and keep all of these links up to date with the latest ones. I also have an events calendar in my Discord. There's an events channel you can go to that also lists these out. So I change both of those at the same time if there is ever a change. Now, thankfully, we don't make a lot of changes, but occasionally we will have to. And this is one of the best places you can go to find out when our next live event is going to be. So if you've watched this video and you want to know where the one is for next month, or you might be watching this on a replay, this may be well after February of 2026. You can always go to that link. It will tell you when our next live event is going to be. We'd love to have you join us. Make sure you check when that next live event is at professormesser.com/calendar. Can you believe we've already done an hour of Q&A? But stick around. I've got another hour of Q&A coming. In this case, though, you're going to ask me questions in our after show. You can find out more there. Stay exactly where you are. We will close out our first hour and start our second hour in a matter of seconds. You don't have to do anything from your side to be able to participate. And if you would like to leave a message or a question, you can go to professormesser.com/QA and use the tab at the top of the screen to submit a question for our after show. Don't forget about our Network Plus Success Bundle and all of our training materials on our website. You can find that at professormesser.com/netsuccess. Don't forget that we also have discounted vouchers available on our site. If you live in the U.S., Canada, or a U.S. territory, you can find those discounted vouchers at professormesser.com/vouchers. And of course, we have lots of links on our site that will take you to your favorite social media site, whether it's Discord or YouTube or Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook. You get the idea. Simply go to professormesser.com/ the name of the site that you would like to find us on. Great way to know when that's going to be. Well, the first hour is done, but we're not done yet. We've got our second hour, our after show coming up next. Stick around for that. Thank you for joining us in this first hour, and we will see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. Thanks, everybody. Okay, let's take a sip. That's so good. Let's fix our cameras. Let's bring this. Oh, I need to fix my camera without me on it. That would be good. And then get rid of our title page. There we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the after show. You guys did really well with the questions that we had in our first hour. Thank you so much for being here in the first hour. But now it's time where I don't ask you the question. It's the time that you ask me the question. And the way that you would do that, not surprising, same link we had before. professormesser.com/QA allows you to submit that question at any time. In fact, if you go to that page that we are on, if I happen to be there, there we are. You can submit questions for that second hour of the study group at any time. There's two of me. At any time. There we go. We will be moderating these questions during the session. Your contribution will not appear immediately because I'm looking at all of these on the back end to be able to see what questions you might have. But maybe you have a question about certifications. Maybe you have a question about information technology. I spent my career working in IT. at some very low levels and some very high levels, so it might be a good place to ask questions about that. We also will take questions about really anything else. If you'd like to know anything else, you're certainly willing, you can ask the question. I don't know if I'll answer every possible question, but I'll certainly look at the questions you have. You could submit those at any time by going to professormesser.com/QA. There's a little tab at the top of the screen where you could submit those questions for the after show. So let's do that. I'm going to now look at your questions that you have brought in and put onto this list and see if we have all of these that are here. We got a lot of questions that you have submitting, and we could probably step through a number of these. Before we do that, I mentioned at the end of the study group that I had a page where you could get the objectives, professormesser.com/objectives. I wanted to show you where that was. On the objectives, we have, here's the exam objectives page. You can see on the left-hand side, we have the links, direct links to the A+ objectives, the Network Plus objectives, the Security Plus objectives, and then everything else. And then I have a screenshot of the entire page. You'll notice that you need to scroll down because by default, it will show you the summary page. You will want to scroll down to where this red box happens to be. Let's see if we can see it. In fact, we will go to that page. I'm just going to click the CompTIA Network Plus objectives. And of course, an ad pops up. We'll close the ad. There we go. Here is the CompTIA website, Network Plus, and here are the exam objectives summary. But if we keep scrolling down, keep scrolling, scroll some more, keep going down the list, scroll. There's the red box. Now, if you don't see that red box, then that's because you filtered something. You have turned on JavaScript blocking, you've turned on some type of ad blocking or pop-up blocking. You are preventing that from being seen on your screen. It's really there, but if you don't see it, it's something you did, not something they did. So as you can see, you put in your email address here, you click access now. I guess I need to check the box if I'd like to proceed, which is I'm checking it by agreeing to the privacy notice that I'm clearly not reading, and then I'm clicking access now. And here's all the links. You can download the Network Plus exam objectives in English, in German, in Japanese, in Portuguese, and in Spanish. So if we click the English one, here is the English N10-009 objectives. What's the latest version they're up to? Version 6.0. There aren't usually a lot of differences with the exam objectives document itself. That's version 6.0 of the document, not version 6.0 of the certification. For some reason, CompTIA felt it necessary in the new year to add version numbers to the exam numbers that are redundant. So the N10-009 exam is the same thing as the Network Plus version 9 exam. Why they added a version number? I don't know. Maybe they're planning to update individual exam numbers with new versions in the future. That will be awful. That will be, I hope they don't do that. That would be very difficult to be able to work through if you're someone like me that has to update all of the content and keep all of those versions straight. So that is another thing to think about. But that's where you would find your objectives document. Make sure you find that, you download the objectives, and now you know everything you need to know before you walk into the Network Plus exam. Make sure you get your hands on those objectives. Let's go through your list of questions that you have submitting. There's a lot of questions that have come through, or we have a lot there to be able to break through. Let's see what questions you might have. We got a lot there. We did a performance-based question earlier on in the study group, and as a follow-up to that, Mac asks, how does the performance-based questions, how do they work for Network Plus, and what's the level of difficulty? I think that a lot of people get very concerned about the performance-based questions, that they are somehow more difficult than the rest of the exam, or they're asking questions that you couldn't possibly know the answer to, and therefore it's a very difficult question to go through. What I tend to get for feedback after the exam is over is people will come back to my site and they will say, you know, I went through the exam and I was very concerned about the performance-based questions, but it turns out they weren't that hard at all. And that's usually the majority of the feedback that I get about performance-based questions is that people were over concerned. They were worried about something that ultimately they didn't need to worry about. As I mentioned, if you know the exam objectives, if you are familiar, You know all of those topics. You can explain those topics to yourself or to someone else. Then you can answer the performance-based questions. All it is asking you the same information as a multiple choice question, and you're just putting the answer in rather than choosing it from a list. It's effectively the same thing. So don't get all wrapped up with not understanding performance-based questions or how they work or what the concern might be. In reality, it's probably going to be a lot easier than you think. And if you know the exam objectives, it's going to be super easy because all of those performance-based questions come directly from that list as well. So don't worry so much about the fact that you don't understand what the format will be. I can see where there would be some concern, a little anxiety over that one, that you don't know what they're going to ask or how they're going to ask it. Is it going to be fill in the blank? Is it going to be a matching question? Is it going to be drag and drop? Is it going to be any other style of question that they could ask? It could be. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because you already know the answers. You know the answers before they even ask the question because you already went through the official CompTIA exam objectives. So that's my recommendation is don't worry about the performance-based questions. Ultimately, you may find the performance-based questions really don't matter at all. I had one person report back after their exam and say that I skipped over the performance-based questions, which you can do. You can pass by a question without answering it. You can just say next question, next question, next question, and get past that handful of performance-based questions at the beginning of the exam. They went through then all of the multiple choice questions. They got through all of the multiple choice questions, but they didn't do a very good job with their time management. And by the time they got to their last multiple choice question, 89.5 minutes had gone by. So they had 30 seconds to be able to answer the 5 different performance-based questions they got, or whatever the number happened to be. So they ultimately were not able to answer any of the performance-based questions. They literally didn't provide an answer for any of them, and they still passed. So this is not the standard for everyone because everybody's test is a little bit different. Everybody has a different number and type of performance-based questions. Everybody has a different distribution of multiple choice questions that they will receive. And of course, we don't know how well you're going to do in answering the multiple choice questions. So you can't always rely on this as a good strategy for studying or for taking your exam. But if you do pass by the performance-based questions, leave a little time at the end so that you can circle back and at least try to answer the questions that they have there. I never recommend skipping over a question. Always leave yourself enough time to at least provide a best guess at what you think the answer happens to be. That's something important for performance-based questions, but for that particular person, that would be good. That would work really well, working through the details of this. So hopefully that's given you some ideas of things that might be important with those performance-based questions, how you might want to manage them, how you might want to manage your time. There's a lot involved during the exam process when you're sitting in the room. Just another one of those things that's important to keep in mind. Let's go through this list. I want to look at another piece of information that I have here. Speaking of exam objectives, I'm trying to pick out the best possible questions that you might have here. And I want to work through all of the different pieces of that. Let's break this down because this is an important consideration. And it's one that I get a lot of questions about, which is what do I need to learn? What do I need to know on this exam? It's a fine question. There are important things that we need to know for this exam, but how deep do we go with some of these? And it's a challenge not just for you, it's also a challenge for me because I have to create the training materials that will match or best match what you are expected to see on the exam itself. And so I try to focus on what you need to know. What I'm concerned about is giving you too much information of things you don't need to know. There's a lot of those training courses out there that just throw a wall of information at you without any concern of whether you need to know that for the exam or not. I guess there is a broader idea that it's more important that you know things broader so that you can bring everything back to the less broad topics, which makes no sense when you're studying for a certification exam, but would make sense if you were in a job. Well, we're taking a certification exam. So for the purposes of your exam, I would highly recommend you stick to the exam objectives. That is going to be the best way to understand what the different options might be for you. So the question that came in from you along those lines was a question that asked, and this could be applied to anything really. It's a question that asked, this is from Anonymous, who says, how do I remember the 802.11 standards? And my answer to this, as it applies to the Network Plus exam, is I wonder what 802.11 standards we need to know. So let's go to the exam objectives, shall we? I think I have a set of objectives that I put up here. It's our objectives that we downloaded. Oh, I put them on this side. There they are. So in section 1.5, compare and contrast transmission media and transceivers, here's a section that says wireless. We have to know about wireless transmission media and transceivers. Obviously, with wireless, our media is the air itself. Not much to know there. But for wireless, we need to know what 802.11 standards are. We need to know what a cellular network is. And we need to know what a satellite network is. Those are very common wireless networks that you might use. Notice that nothing on here specifically lists any standards associated with those. So they aren't breaking down and saying, for 802.11 standards, you need to know the A standard, the B standard, the G standard, the AC standard, the AX standard. They don't go through the N standard. They don't go through any specific standards in this list. Notice with cellular, they also don't go through any specific cellular standards. Are you talking about LTE? Are you talking about LTE Plus? Are you talking about 5G? Doesn't matter. It's not in this list. We also have satellite. There's a lot of different standards for satellite data communication. We use a number of different, depending on the satellite system that you are using. Those specific standards are not listed in here. The general rule of thumb with these exam objectives is that if something is specifically listed in the objectives, you need to know it. If something is not specifically listed in these objectives, it is not as important to know. In many cases, not necessary to know for the certification exam. For example, let me give you an example of this, a reverse example, just to show my point here. They could have had in this list a bullet that said fiber connectors. And they would have wanted you to understand what the differences and values are in using a fiber connector over ostensibly a copper connector. But they didn't list out just generic fiber connectors in the exam objectives. They listed out subscriber connector, local connector, straight tip, and multi-fiber push-on. They gave you 4 very specific fiber connector types. So in that case, they're not asking about a broader perspective of how fiber connectors are used. They're asking about 4 very specific connector types. Compare and contrast that with the line that says 802.11 standards. They are not listing out 802.11a, 802.11b, 802.11g, 802.11n, 802.11ac, 802.11ax. They're not listing those. They're simply saying 802.11 standards. This is a little bit different than previous exam versions where there was a lot more detail under the wireless section. So I'm kind of giving you a little bit of inside baseball about how you interpret the exam objectives themselves, but it applies towards all of the CompTIA exams. If it's not in this list, you do not need to know it for the exam. Now, is it important to know about wireless standards? Is it important maybe even to know about specific wireless standards? It very well could be in your work environment, but that'll be something outside the scope of your exam. And what's nice about this, and you'll notice this from previous Network Plus versions, the reason they took out specific standards is because it became way too much rote memorization for this exam. For example, if we go back to the very beginning of this, section 1.4 is a list of all the ports and protocols you need to know. That looks familiar. And again, if you stick to this list, these are the only ports and protocols that you need to know for the Network Plus exam. I've seen people show up with a page or 2 of what must have been 100 port numbers that they were trying to memorize. And I said, why are you memorizing 100 port numbers? Well, this is the sheet that I got from my my instructor, and they said we need to know all of these. Like, well, you don't. You need to know these. And that's it. That is your limit. So if they want you to know it, they will list it on the screen in this exam objective list. You will see it physically. Oh, I need to know that. If it's not in this list, you don't need to know it. They stick to this list 100% of the exam, it seems. Very close to that. 99% of the exam. Sometimes they do ask you things that go off of this list. Those very often are questions that are not graded. They do talk about in the exam instructions about that scenario. So that's how I would recommend you interpret this list, is that not always do you need to keep digging and digging and digging and digging down to the nth degree. You don't have to know what type of signaling mechanism is used on an 802.11 network in order to transfer information at that particular bandwidth. You could research that and you could find that information, but it's not important for the exam because it's not listed in the exam objectives. That's my takeaway for you. That will save you a lot of time. I guarantee it. When you are working through the objectives and trying to figure out what do I need to know, what do I not need to know, always go to the objectives, professormesser.com/objectives, professormesser.com/objectives, professormesser.com/objectives. That will be your best place to go to get your hands on those objectives. I think this was kind of a funny question sent in, but kind of a good question to send in. It makes me think about different things when I start breaking this down. This is from William. Will.I.am says, my favorite day of the week to take an exam? What a good question. This will vary for different people. And what got me thinking is, I wonder if there is a certain day of the week, broadly, if we were to compile all of the results. Obviously, CompTIA is the only one that has this information. For all the rest of us, it's pure speculation. But if they were to look at a list of people passing and people failing the exam on a particular day, and they broke it out by Sunday through Saturday, I wonder what day is the best day to take an exam. I'm very curious about that now. Statistically, I want to know. I guess we could probably make some assumptions from this. I think that Mondays and Fridays are out. No Monday, no Friday. Monday, not a day. Really, Monday shouldn't exist. I'm going to call my senator and ask them to present a bill removing Monday from the calendar. I think that will be useful for all of us. Fridays are not a good day to take an exam because you're not thinking about the exam. At least I'm thinking in my mind that's how it should be. It should not be a Monday. It should not be a Friday. Probably not a weekend either. Sometimes there's chaos on a weekend. But Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday seem to me to be good days to take an exam. But again, this will, of course, depend on you. There may be some of you that work through the week and Monday and Tuesday are your days off. And you work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday and Tuesday, you're off those days. Well, in that case, Monday and Tuesday might be a better day to take the exam because you don't have to worry about work. You don't have to worry about time. You're focusing on in that case, it's your weekend. So maybe weekends are pretty good days to be able to work through that. Everybody's going to have a different day of work, what works best for them. I guess in my mind, I was curious about the broader picture of, generally speaking, statistically, what days are better than others. It would be interesting, wouldn't it? Just admit it. You know it would be. Statistics is always an interesting thing. There's, as they say, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. And we can only really discern a certain type of information from a statistical breakdown, obviously. But another example of that. So I did get a number of other questions presented this month to me that you don't see, but I'm not going to put them up because people ask, do I need to know this for the exam? Do I need to know that for the exam? Do I need to know something else for the exam? Do I need to know these other things for the exam? So all of those questions have the same answer. If it's in the exam objectives, you need to know it. If it's not in the exam objectives, you do not need to know it for the exam. That's it. It's a very simple thing. To the point, they stick to the exam so closely that to that point, if you know all of these bullets, you have gone through the entire set of exam objectives, you know every single bullet in the objectives and nothing else. Let's say you know nothing else outside the scope of these bullets in the world of networking. you just know what's on this screen and you know what all these bullets are and you can explain it to someone else and you've learned this content, you're going to ace this exam. You're going to crush it. It's not even going to be a question. You're going to pass it with no problem. That's how close they stick to the objective. So I do have this mantra during these live streams where I'm constantly telling you, stick to the objectives, stick to the objectives. And even still in our industry, I hear other instructor sites out there on the internet telling you, no, you should go outside the objectives to give yourself more knowledge and balance about nature and the world. I don't know why they say that, really. I don't understand where they're coming from on that one. Should you know things outside the scope of this if you're planning to get into networking? Yes, of course you should. You will be learning your entire career. There will never be a time in your IT career where you're not learning some type of new technology. That's not our purpose here, however. Our purpose is to get you Network Plus certified. And trust me, there's plenty of information you need to know already. It's not like you're shorting yourself by only knowing these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of topics. This is a pretty good list. And starting here is a fantastic way to get your mind into the world of IT networking. It pretty much follows everything that you need to know. I hear people also all the time on the internet say, well, these Network Plus courses, they're teaching you about token ring and ATM networking. Well, they did 15 years ago, I guess. I guess people don't realize that they update these exams every 3 years. So they don't understand that the old stuff is thrown out and the new stuff is added. So these are really good exams. They're up to date. All the content you're learning is applicable to today's networks. If you walk into any data center, you will find all of these listed in that data center somewhere. You will find the routing tables and the troubleshooting and the Cisco discovery protocols and the port numbers and the security concerns and everything else that's in this list. This is a pretty good list of things that you might need to know if you're planning to get into the world of networking. And why wouldn't you? I loved working with networks. When I was in network administration, I was doing network design, networks, all of that networking work that I went into, understanding the packets, understanding troubleshooting and security at the packet level. All of that prepared me for my career in cybersecurity and working for next generation firewall companies. Those are valuable, valuable skills. Everything starts and ends with the network. So the more you know about the network, the better you will be about every other aspect of technology. It is really the center and the foundation of everything we do from a technology perspective. So whether you are studying databases, you are studying the cloud, you are studying virtualization, you are studying Linux, all of those topics all come back to the network. That's how valuable these particular topics are. So another way that you can really focus on understanding what you need to know, stick to the objectives. Let's keep going through your list of things that you have. There are a number of great questions in here. Some of these I'm going to come back to. You guys really spent some time putting together some great questions on this list. Thank you. If you'd like to submit your question, if one comes to mind, use the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to be able to do that. So here is a lot of different things that you could do. Let's go to KM has an interesting question here. KKM or KKMM has this question. Obviously, I don't think this is a federal government job because they say, I have a technical interview in Huawei for network security engineering partnership. I don't know how to prepare for this. Well, Huawei is a company that relies tons of networking, lots of wireless networking, lots of cellular networking, and lots of traditional wired networking as well. They are a big networking company. The reason I mentioned not federal government is that the U.S. federal government has decided that certain manufacturers are no longer allowed on federal networks. I'm not sure if they finalized that with Huawei of their entire suite of products yet or not, but just something to keep in mind that some devices should not be on your network due to a number of challenging and interesting security concerns. We'll just leave it at that. There's plenty to read up on when it comes to Huawei. But let's just say I am in a technical interview at a networking company, at a wireless company, at a technology company for a network security engineering internship. How do you prepare for something like that? Well, part of the challenge with any of these is that the world of networking is very broad and there are a huge number of topics. I think I just said the same thing twice. It's just tons of things that you need to know in the world of networking, and you can't know everything, but you might know the basics. When I worked in the next generation firewall world, we would interview prospective system administrators that were coming on board to present our technologies to customers, to potential customers, people who wanted to buy the technologies. So we would always query people on how much they knew technically, but we didn't start with the very pinnacle of technology. We didn't ask them, write on the board the entire Ethernet frame, all of the different fields of the Ethernet frame, the size of the fields of the Ethernet frame, and what those fields do. Technically, I'm not sure if I'd be able to do that correctly now that I'm thinking about it myself. I could give you a broad overview. I could probably piece it out from my mind, but having not studied that, we sort of get complacent reading the packet captures. They do a lot of that for you, but that's important information to know. But we generally don't start there in an interview. We generally start very basic, because if someone can't answer the basic questions, they're not going to be able to answer the more difficult questions. There was a systems engineer I worked with, a systems engineer manager out of the Northeast US, and he always had a great opening set of questions. And you've heard me talk about this before. He would start with the question, tell me everything you know about ARP. That was the question. ARP, the Address Resolution Protocol, ARP. You've learned that in your Network Plus studies. You've seen that in your Network Plus studies. We've talked about ARP poisoning. We've talked about the in-place type attacks that deal with someone being in the middle of a conversation. ARP is a way, one of the many ways that you could make something like that happen. And of course, ARP is used extensively on our networks to be able to perform that address resolution. So we have an IP address, we need a MAC address, and ARP is able to make that conversion for us, that resolution in real time on the network. But that's not the only type of ARP is there. So we can have somebody explain that part of the address resolution protocol. But what about reverse ARP? Do you see that much anymore? What about a gratuitous ARP? These are actual ARP types that you might want to know. What about a proxy ARP? When would be a proxy ARP? When would you see a proxy ARP used in the world of next generation firewalls? So that's a very broad question. We're not even asking something highly technical at that point. But if you just throw out, tell me everything you know about ARP, there's an hour-long conversation you can have if you wanted to about what you would use these different ARP versions for, what they provide, why we do or don't see that type of ARP being used on our networks any longer, or maybe all the time. That's a very broad question. It really is a brilliant question to ask a prospective employee, because it starts a conversation about the experience they've had and the depth of knowledge they have about not just networking, but security technologies in general. Leads you right down that path. And I always thought that was such a great question to ask. It was such a fun question to listen to someone answer as well, because immediately you can start seeing who the smart people are with ARP. They've got experience in it. They can tell you why the proxy ARP would be used. They could tell you where gratuitous ARP comes into play. You can talk all about the advantages and disadvantages of ARP, and they just explain it all without you having to do anything. It's such a broad question to answer. Normally, you think of a technical interview as, how many bits in a byte? There's 8. Correct. That's not how it goes. They're usually broader questions like the one, tell me everything you know about ARP. You know, there's not a specific, the answer's not 8. You don't have an answer for that one. It's a broader conversation. And so it's useful to know about those technologies. It's probably more useful to know about the company that you're going to visit. So don't worry so much about what you know or don't know about technology. that's pretty much locked in at this point. You're not going to be able to study really reliably or efficiently for a position at a company because you have no idea what they're going to ask of you. However, you might be able to discern some of that based on what company you're going to visit. So if you're going to visit a firewall company, there's probably going to be some conversation about installing, deploying, and managing firewalls, and setting up firewall rules, and setting up redundancy with firewalls, and how you would connect the firewall, how you would plan this out, how you would design the network around it. Those are probably an obvious set of questions that might show up in an interview. If you're going to work for a software company, it might be a different set of questions. It might be based around the ability of a company to be able to develop software. How do we back up that software? How do we protect the software? How do we set security controls on the software? A different set of questions, but still in that same world of IT security or technology in general. So I always tell people, get a very good understanding of a company. If it's a public company, get their annual report. For those of you not familiar with public companies and how they work, they must create an annual report, and most often a quarterly report, not just showing, we often think of that as you're looking through their financials, and that's an entirely different conversation we can have about understanding what that financial summary is. A balance sheet is an important thing to see, but it's not necessarily important for your interview. What might be more important for your interview is in an annual report, many companies will list out the projects that they have completed over the last year, and they also will sometimes mention projects they're planning for the next 12 months. Here's a great way that you could throw some of these things out in an interview and impress the people that work there that you really have been researching this company, you understanding what they've been doing. So if they ask you a question about securing a network, you could say, I was thinking about that very question when I was reading through your annual report where you just implemented that new application, blah, 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 and you made sure to implement multi-factor authentication. I noticed that during the next year, you're planning this big imaging / cloud / whatever it is, push. Are you planning to use a similar security methodology for that project as well? So being able to understand what people have done and understand where they are going can be impressive to be able to throw out in the middle of the interview. There have been times I've mentioned this in an interview. I haven't done a lot of interviews in my life where I'm the interviewee, but sometimes I've thrown out things like that and they had no idea what I was talking about. Like, what? That we're doing that this year? Is that a project we're working on this year? Well, it was in your annual report. The CEO thinks you're doing it. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I would love to work on that project. If you finally get asked to be able to do something with that one, I'm ready. I read about it. I'm excited about it. I'd love to see how that goes. So there may be things you can do for your security engineering internship to be able to prepare. Those might be useful things to be able to break down and get an understanding of. Might be useful. Let's keep going through this list. There's a lot of good questions that we have in here. This is a question that seems to come up often. I'm not really sure. I do mention this on the very first video of my Network Plus course, and it asks, do my videos cover all the objectives? Well, do they? Have you looked through them yet? This is one of the benefits of having this video course be free and available to everybody in the world, is that when you look through a video of a particular topic, did it match perfectly with the official CompTIA exam objectives? The answer, I'll give you the answer. The answer is yes. We cover every single objective that you have. In fact, I use the exam objectives as my checklist when I am building out my courses. I have a separate spreadsheet. I have a Google sheet of every single bullet that is in that exam objective list, broken out by a bullet and sub-bullet and sub-sub-bullet, etc. And I list out every single video. Before I shoot the video, I know exactly what video that topic is going to go to, and I create a name for that video, and I list out all of the topics I'm going to cover in that single video. So before I've even sat down and created the content, I already know the exact structure of the course because it's basically already set up for me. CompTIA has done a lot of the heavy lifting here and provided me with a bullet by bullet by bullet by bullet breakdown of everything I need to know. This is where people, I think, get confused, is they'll go to my video on wireless networks, and I don't go through every single wireless standard that has ever been released and what the bandwidths are and what the frequencies are and what the signaling protocol is and I don't do any of that because it's not in the exam objectives. So if it's not in the objectives, you don't need to know it. And I don't need to create a video for it because there are plenty of places you can go to get technology information that's outside the scope of the objectives, but that's not important for you if you're trying to get a Network Plus. So it's that same story that I'm giving over and over and over again. Stick to the objectives. Stick to those exam objectives. The exam objectives are the things that you should stick to. It's not in the list. You don't need to know it. If it is in the list, you absolutely need to know it. That is your watchword. That is your mantra. That is your guide for your studies. Make sure you are familiar with the things that are important and the things that are not as important. Sometimes that's the most important are the things not as important. That made no sense. It did in my head. It made sense there. It didn't make sense when I said it out loud, which is most of the time my normal state. Let's keep going through your questions. Other questions you have. This is a good question because it speaks to kind of a broader set of questions. Nicholas asks, which cert do you recommend taking first? Network Plus or Security Plus? Now, you could take the same question and put in any certifications in these lists. Which cert do you recommend taking first? Security Plus or A Plus? Which do you recommend taking first? Security Plus or CCNA or an Azure cert or an AWS cert or a Linux cert? Or I get this question, I don't know, 1 million times a day. That's a pretty accurate number. It's 1 million times a day. I get this question quite often during the week. I'm working on this. What should I take first? Or I just finished my A+. What do I take next? And the question is one that I don't have an answer for you because I can't have an answer for you. I am not you. I don't know what your current situation is. I don't know what jobs you have worked in IT, if any. I don't know where you live, which does have an impact on which certifications might be more or less an option for you. I'll explain that in a moment. And I don't know what your career plans are. I don't know what interests you either. So there's a lot of unknowns here before I'm even able to answer that question. What cert should I take first? What should I take next? What should I take after that? Because I don't know which one would really be the best choice for you. Now, we could figure it out if we sat down and we had a coffee and we talked about what's good, what's bad, and where do you want to be, and where do you see yourself, what technologies are interesting to you, and what do you find as being interesting in the most modern technologies. There's a lot of places you could go in the world of technology. That's one of the benefits of IT is you could be a Linux expert. You could be a Windows expert. You can be an Active Directory expert. You could be an expert in networking. You could be an expert in security. You could find an expertise in a lot of different areas. That's just a few of them in the world of IT. That's a great benefit. In fact, many people will move from one to the other. They'll start in Linux, they'll move into networking, then they'll get into security. That's a common path for people. So it also will depend on what opportunities happen to be available to you where you live. And if you were to look at job postings in the Washington, D.C. area, you just go to your favorite job posting board online, go to LinkedIn Jobs, go to Indeed, go to whatever you like to go to look at jobs. And in that list, look at what jobs maybe fit that entry level into your area. Maybe look at help desk jobs and find out what they're asking for. What you will find in the Washington, D.C. area, which is there's obviously a predominant number of federal jobs, the federal government positions, especially with Department of Defense. Those positions want you to have a minimum of a Security Plus or similar certification. So a lot of people end up getting Security Plus as their first IT cert so that they meet the requirements of those job postings in Washington, D.C. That makes perfect sense. That's the predominant number of jobs. Therefore, you're going to need that certification. Most of the jobs are asking for that certification. Relatively obvious. If you had the choice, do I get a security plus or do I get an A plus? If you're in DC, you're getting the security plus. That just makes sense for most of the people that live there. But what if you live in Dallas? What if you live in LA? What if you live in Seattle? There's probably a different priority in those particular geographies. So Dallas probably has a completely different set of certifications they're looking for. Maybe it's more specific to the job. Maybe certain companies prefer certain certifications. You run into that all the time. So I can't give you an answer on what the next cert should be because I don't know. I don't have a good way to tell you that. So what I'll tell you is to do what I just did. Go out to these job posting sites, look at the jobs that are out there. What is everybody asking for? That should be another thing that leads you in a direction. It helps. It's another data point that will help you make a qualified decision. And that's what we're looking to do. We're not looking just to take random people on the internet that are telling you, well, certification A is stupid. You should do certification B. No, certification B is stupid. You should do certification A. Those conversations happen all the time on the internet with no other context other than I like A, well, I like B. Well, neener. Well, neener to you. That it seems like a pointless conversation unless you have these other data points thrown into that mix. Now, on top of that, just because every company in your area is looking for a certain cert doesn't necessarily mean that is still the right cert for you, but it goes in the list of things that if I'm looking for certification, looking for a job in this area, and everybody wants that certification, that's going to probably push you a certain direction. And it should, because that's what those data points do. You need some type of actionable data to be able to make those decisions. And I don't have that data to be able to answer that question for you. So although it is a great question, which one should you do next? I am not the person to answer that for you. I'm so sorry. There are obviously some certifications in this industry that are more popular than others, but I think the job postings tend to reflect that. The more you see on the job postings, it's the more popular the certification tends to be. So there is a connection there. There's no way to really correlate that, obviously, because it's based on popularity, but it sort of reflects the popularity in the job postings that you find. And obviously that changes depending on where you happen to live in the world or in this country. So another consideration, another thing to consider as you're going through the world of trying to figure out what these different options might be, what these different job postings bring in, what certifications you might want to do. And it might just not be one certification. You might want to set up 2 or 3 and set up your goal to move down that list to cover a broad set of bases. There's a different strategy depending on who you are and what you're doing. So everybody has a different story and a different plan. My recommendation to be pick the plan that works for you and to go with that. There's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. There's only broadly a direction and a feel and an interest and a demand that you need to keep in mind and consider as you are making that decision. This is, after all, your career. This is what you will be doing for the rest of whatever you plan to do in IT. In my case, the rest of my career. So I started out knowing the basics of hardware. Really, I got a training on PCs and understanding this is a motherboard. These are the lights on a motherboard that give you diagnostic information. This is how you would install an expansion card. This is how you replace the memory. This is how you replace the storage drive. Once you know those fundamentals, I can then, one of my very first jobs out of college was working as a field service technician. So I'd hop in my car in the morning, I'd pick up all my equipment. Here's a hard drive, here's some memory, here's a printer. And I would take those to a customer site and install them. So I would install the memory upgrade. I would install the storage device. We're adding on a new drive or we're replacing the drive that's there. They need a new printer installed. Here's your new printer. We'll plug it in. We'll make sure it works. We'll load the driver. It prints okay. I'm off to the next one. And so a lot of what I did was at that level. It was working at that hardware level. But then I got a job because I knew the hardware so well. My next job was working at a life insurance company. in their IT department. So it was the traditional help desk. I upgraded to help desk, if you will. I finally got a job in help desk. That was my second IT job out of college. During college, I worked as a mainframe operator. So it was still in the world of technology with large scale mainframes and supercomputers. So I took that and rolled it into a field service tech. And finally, my third technology job finally was at a help desk. But it was at the help desk where I started to learn about operating systems, understanding deployment strategies, understanding uptime and availability. There's a lot more to technology than just the ones and zeros. There's that whole, how do we deploy this technology? How do we maintain this technology? How do we patch this technology? These are important things to know as well. So I learned all that specifically around the world of Windows and the world of network operating systems, and was able to leverage that into a networking position eventually. And that networking position took me to working for companies like Network General, Network Associates, and NetScout, knowing how the network operates the packet level. If you have that level of knowledge, you could leverage that into other technology positions, which I did, which leveraged me into the world of security and working with next generation firewalls. So I didn't know when I was driving around the streets of South Florida and dealing with the Palmetto Expressway and trying to get down I-95 and taking the turnpike but not having change, all of those problems back in the day. And I didn't understand at the time that it was teaching me some valuable technology skills that I would ultimately be able to level up, and finally reach what I consider to be the pinnacle of my technology career, working as a senior systems engineer for Palo Alto Networks, where you got to play with the most advanced security technologies in the world, and work with people that are at some of these monster-sized companies designing, building, and implementing some of these security technologies into their environments. That's a fascinating technology position to be in. One that I would not have thought about when I was trying to get down the Palmetto Expressway at rush hour. But now I realize there's a point to this process. There's a means, an end to those means that we could work through. And that was one I think worked very well. It works this way with everybody. You will certainly be in a position where you sort of start with that grunt kind of work, working either at the bottom levels or the hardware or whatever it happens to be, and you'll start building on it. And you start building this foundation, and your foundation gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as time goes on. And eventually you'll be in a position where you can leverage that foundation into these other areas of IT that will be incredibly valuable if you're somebody who is planning to stick with this crazy world of information technology. One of the advantages of that is that the more foundation you build, generally that matches your increase in salary, which also matches the flexibility you have in your particular job. The smarter you are about these topics, the more specialization you have in these topics, the more unique knowledge you have in these topics, the more flexibility you will have in your career. Because the more specific your knowledge and less generalized your knowledge, the less people in the world know this. So now you're going to be valuable. Your skills will be extremely valuable to an employer. It may be relatively easy at that point to find the jobs you want. I wish that was the case with Palo Alto Networks. That was a tough interview process. I'm still not sure they meant to hire me. I keep asking them. I asked my boss years on down the line, was this a mistake? Did you really not plan on hiring me? It was really tough getting in. And I think they took a risk. Quite in their minds, I think they took a risk on hiring me. I knew I could do the job. I wanted to do the job. But sometimes it's hard to convince an employer, especially someone at the time was a startup. No one had ever heard of Palo Alto Networks. They could not afford to make a wrong decision. So I completely understood the need to have the right people in the right positions. That can make or break a startup. And I'm really glad they invested in me and my skills, because it was one of the most fun jobs I ever had. Imagine plugging into a number of different networks every day from a security perspective to see things happening that up to that point they had no idea was happening on their network. It was both surprising, it was embarrassing at times, it was scary at times, the things that you would see on someone's network that nobody thought they would be able to see. Very remarkable. The remarkable stories you could get out of me, where I would definitely not tell you the customer names, but I could tell you the not safe for work stories that came from things like that. So it's just another example of sometimes you don't know where this will lead. You don't know where you will go with this, but you will go somewhere. The skills you are learning today will be valuable for you in ways that you probably don't realize today, but you will realize it eventually down the road. Let's keep going down the list. Lots of questions coming in. Thank you so much for doing this and putting these questions out here. I do have time for another one. I know we're at the top of the hour. I'm very sensitive to your time, but I will definitely step through another one of these and having this list of things that you have sent here. I said there was a question. I want to roll back up to that question you asked earlier, and I want to be sure I get the right one. This is a question about planning, not just for your certification, but we've been talking a lot about planning for your job. And one of the things, I have a video that is in this YouTube video description. There's a link to this video in the YouTube video description of how to get a job in IT with no experience. I made a video on that because it's a question I get constantly from people that are earning their initial certification. And they want to know, okay, I got the cert. Now what do I do? How do I get a job? I don't have experience yet, but they're asking for experience. How am I supposed to get a job that asks for experience when I don't have experience? And so I give you some options in that video and things you can think about. One of the things I talk about in that video is a home lab. I think maybe you don't have a professional experience in that no one's paid you for your skills, but you might have practical experience. And so how do you get that across to a prospective employer that you know what you're talking about? And one of the best ways to do it is with a home lab. And so Drennan asks, how would you go about setting up a practice lab at home yourself? And we're going to talk from the perspective of Network Plus for this one. We've talked about it on our security study groups and our A+ study groups, but let's talk about networking and let's just think about the things that we could have in a practice lab. First, why would you even have a practice lab? Why is that necessary? Well, it's one thing to learn about address resolution protocol. It's another thing to capture the ARP protocol on your network and view the packet capture of it and see everything that is contained within that little bit of data that's being sent across your network. And then understanding not just the request that was made for the ARP, but the response that you get, I think links together that protocol and how it works in a way that you simply can't describe from a video or a book or any other way, or the RFC. I think seeing the protocol in action and not just seeing it in the packet capture, but looking at your ARP table on your machine. Did you know you even had an ARP table on your machine? If you're on Windows, what is it, ARP-A? Does it do that in Windows? I'm trying to remember. I always get my Windows and my Linux mixed up because I use them so much interchangeably these days. But the ARP-A command, or similar depending on the operating system that you are using, will show you your ARP cache on your local computer. I demonstrate this, I think, in my Security Plus course, where I'm doing ARP poisoning, where I show how an ARP request changes the ARP cache on your local computer. And that's an important consideration, and it links together that single protocol. Well, that's some great information, because now that adds to that foundation that we are building. Well, what about a practice lab then? From a networking perspective, a lot of people like to put together networking practice labs where they're connecting different devices together, maybe in a wide area network configuration, or they're redesigning a network in different ways. One of the best ways to do this, by the way, is not with hardware. I mean, it could cost you a couple $100 to get some older switches and routers and play around with the physical devices. But these days, why would you do that? That is much less efficient than doing everything in a simulated or emulated environment. So if you're someone who has worked with Cisco certifications in the past, you're probably familiar with Packet Tracer. Packet Tracer is a utility, a application that simulates an actual network. You have routers, switches, servers, workstations that you could simply drag and drop onto the screen to build out effectively a virtualized network. Now, it's an emulated network. It's not a real network. I was going to look and see if I probably don't have the latest packet tracer on my computer, but it can give you a feel for what that looks like if I can remember my login. Packet tracer does require you to register with Cisco, but it's a free registration and the software itself doesn't cost anything either. So you've got some options there that are free. And I'll say Packet Tracer is an extremely useful application to be able to use. It provides you with the ability to design, configure, and then redesign the network instantly on your screen. You can even do kind of a bullet time thing where you can pause time, have maybe a ping start on your network, and you can watch the ping go from device to device. You can do it one step at a time. You can watch that ping and you can follow the routing path as it goes from one side of the network to the other and do it very slowly and look at the packet captures on your screen. I do have packet tracer on my screen. I'm going to pull up and log into it while I'm talking here, just so you can kind of see a feel. I have some sample downloads that I added to this from some other places as well. Let me see if I can find my login to Packet Tracer. So difficult sometimes just to log into Packet Tracer and get the thing that you need. To be fair, I have not done this in a while. So I don't even know if I'm using the latest Packet Tracer. I guarantee you I am not. And my question is whether I'm going to be able to log in at all. For those of you, you can kind of see Packet Tracer in the background. And this is what it's doing for me. That's what I got. That's what I got going on. Is a little circle that's going on there. So my grandiose thoughts of providing you with an overview of Packet Tracer and what it does, not really working as great as I would have hoped in that view. So what are we going to do? We're going to stop it. We're going to start it again, like you always do with IT. You just become less patient, I think, as you go. And you try to figure out, I don't think I'm going to be able to get into it, but that's something you can do for later. That's a great way to become more familiar with these technologies. Set up a router, set up a switch, change the configuration of switch, change the IP addresses of the router, look at the routing tables, and watch traffic as it's going back and forth through the network. There's tons of configurations there that are good. Chat room being the smartest people that are here telling me, oh yeah, those old versions, they won't log in anymore. Well, you're absolutely right. I can confirm this right now as we're on a live stream. So much for that idea. Mine wasn't that old, by the way. It was only a few months old. So they must have really done an update recently. I'm looking forward to downloading the new version and playing with it myself, and you should do that as well. Packet Tracer is a great tool to use. Well, also, other things you could do in your home lab. One thing that I think would be a lot of fun, and it really fits into the world of networking. I've talked a lot about firewalls here in the after show. One thing that surprised me about the job I got with a firewall company is that it was mostly networking. You know, security is certainly important, and there is an aspect to next generation firewalls that are obviously focused in the world of security, but a lot of the design and implementation of a firewall is really just pure networking. For example, you need to set up 2 firewalls. They need to be active, passive. We need to integrate them into an existing layer 3 network. We want to plug them in a layer 3 mode. So they need to route. We need to set up routing tables. We need to make sure that we got all the routing tables configured, or we have dynamic routing configured. We also need to make sure that whatever's on the other side, that it knows the firewall is there, especially if we're sort of doing it in real time. We're sort of putting the firewall in the middle of the link. We may have to clear out some ARP tables to make that work properly. And then finally, we're up and running. Once we're up and running, we might want to add on VPN connectivity. Let's set up some IPsec VPNs. In the case of Palo Alto Networks, it's a routed VPN configuration. So determining where the traffic goes is not based on a policy necessarily. It's first based on, is the route available to send it across the VPN? And then once we know the route is there a policy to allow or not allow that traffic to go across the VPN? So there was a little bit of security stuck in there at the end, but most of that was networking. If you know how to set up a router, if you know how to set up layer 3, if you know your routing protocols, if you know how to work with a routing table, if you can run a ping and an ARP and a trace route and understand the output from those, you could probably set up a firewall, which would be a great thing to have in your home lab. Not just because there is that networking aspect to it. There certainly is, and that's certainly important. But now you've got sort of a security overlay to the networking that you just did. And there's a story that you can build behind doing that. I set up the firewall. By the way, I got it completely wrong when I initially set it up. Here's a problem I ran into, and here's how I solved that problem. Maybe you set it up and there was a routing issue. Maybe you set it up and you had a subnet mask incorrect. And here's the messages that I saw, and here's how I researched it, and here's how I solved that problem. Whenever you are setting up a home lab, you will almost always run into some type of problem during the setup process. Please document the error. At the moment, when you're in the middle of it, you don't even sometimes think that you should be documenting this. But in reality, it becomes a great story, especially because we'll be able to use this in an interview. And if you've been in these interviews, they love to ask the question, tell us about a time when you ran into a technical problem and you solved it. What was the process you went through? It's a good question because it really does speak to the way that people work and troubleshoot these kinds of issues. Well, you could say, I ran into an amazing one when I was setting up my home lab with a firewall. Here's what happened. And I brought down my whole house, or I broke this application I was using, or I messed up the NAT and nothing would translate properly onto the internet. That's what you want to hear. Here's the problem I ran into. Here's the error I had. Here's how I researched it. Here's how I solved the issue. That's what people want. That's like a 5 or 10 minute conversation, by the way. But at the end of it, you could say, and because of that, I was able to get this firewall up and running. And in the first hour of being up and running, I blocked 500 attacks. And here's the report showing the 500 attacks. So you've taken this concept of working the networking side of things, and ultimately you were able to produce, first, what organization doesn't love a report? They all love reports. They all wish they could do more reports. And now you've got some information that's really interesting, because you could even say, guess what attack was the largest number on my network? Well, here it is. You can show, and these are your copies. You can keep those, and you can give a report of exactly what happened there. That's some valuable stuff. It's a great conversation. It's interesting. And it's one that's they're going to remember that when you walk out of the room. They're going to have the piece of paper. Always leave a deliverable. Always have something you leave with them. Always. Whether if it's an online interview, always have something that you put in the chat, a link to your Google Drive where they can download that report. Always have something that they have separately rather than just your resume. They have something else you're leaving with them. And you're telling an interesting story about the technology that doesn't even necessarily have a networking aspect. The story itself is networking, solving the problem, network address translation, whatever it is that you were doing in that story. But the result of the networking was this interesting security story. And by the way, whether you work in networking or servers or Linux or Windows or cloud or whatever it is, there's always going to be a security component to it. So you're not going outside the scope. You are definitely staying in your lane, but you are giving a story that is the result of all the networking hard work that you did. And it's an interesting story. It doesn't have to be necessarily about firewalls. It might be that you set up Microsoft Windows Server with Active Directory. You deployed an Active Directory policy, and this was the result of that. There are interesting things you can do there. Or you might have said, I needed to set up a kiosk. I wanted to see how hard it would be to really set up kiosk mode in Windows. Here's what I did. And you could say, I tried to break it. I tried to get around it. And I found a way around it from a thing I found on the internet, and Microsoft patched it. And there's all kinds of ways you could go with that one as well. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be about networking or security or operating systems, but it might combine all of those together. There could be really good stuff there to work through. So I think practice labs are great. Find something that works best for the type of job that you are applying to. Build that out in your home lab. And now you've got some stories that you could take into the interview itself. Let me I know we're past the top of the hour. I have one more question that came in the chat room. Harlan says, my test is tomorrow. I've been watching your videos. Today is my last day. Any advice? Well, I think this applies not just 24 hours before, but maybe a week before. Go back to your objectives. The objectives are the beginning and the end. They are everything you need to know. Anything that will be asked on your exam is in this document. So that's where you should spend your next 24 hours. In fact, I would go through this document and start with the very top of this. In fact, let me bring it up into a mode where I can really start working with it here. It's a PDF, so you can annotate it. I'm going to annotate here with maybe things I don't know super well in yellow, things I know really well in green, things I don't know really well in red. So you might go through this list and think, I know router's good. I know switch is really good. You know what I don't know really well is the IDS IPS. So I might highlight those so I can come back to that one later. I know load balancer is pretty good. I know proxies pretty well. Proxies I'm a little bit iffy on. So maybe I mark that one in yellow. Well, now I have, if I can go through this entire document, now I have an annotated list of the things that I personally don't feel super solid about. There's where I should focus. Everything red, that's where I should focus on for the next 24 hours or the next 7 days or whatever it is. Once I finish with the red, I can circle back to the yellow and you're done. There you've hit the big points. Now, the green stuff that you may have marked earlier, maybe you've gone through this list. We'll do a couple greens here just to get some color on the screen. I know routers pretty well. I know switches pretty well. I know firewalls pretty well. I know load balancers pretty well. And I know NAS pretty well. So there's your list just from that first column of section 1.2. Now I know exactly where to go. I know exactly where to focus. I know where to really break these things down. And that's the real idea. Now, somebody in the chat room said, yeah, but what if they don't ask you that on the exam? Doesn't matter if there's no way they're going to ask you every single topic on this Network Plus exam objective. That's not the point of this. You get a subset of these objectives on your exam, but they're going to be from this list. They're not going to go outside the scope of this list to ask these things. But you only have 90 minutes. There are only a maximum of 90 questions. You obviously can't ask every single topic that is in these exam objectives. Doesn't work that way, but that's the way industry exams like this work. That's the way certification exams work. You're given a tome that you must read through, and ultimately they're going to ask you from a very small percentage of those things on the actual exam. I guess they probably want to ask you every possible question, but realistically, you can't do that on an exam. They're going to give you a subset, and that's where it will go. Obviously, the list of questions you get on your exam will be different than the list of questions you get on someone else's exam. These are a big pool of questions. They are randomly chosen when you sit for the exam. Let's say you didn't pass the first time and you're going in to take it again, we have retake vouchers on our site, so you can already plan for that. You can retake the exam. You're going to get a different combination of questions. Some of them might overlap. Just statistically, you might have some that end up in there, but it will not be the same exam. It will be a different grouping of questions taken from that very large pool. So you have to be prepared for anything. The exam objectives will be able to prepare you for any of those contingencies. For the next 24 hours, you're now working on this certification. You're now working on this exam. You're planning to take this exam tomorrow. I think that would be the best use of your time. Well, I think that's a really great place to finish for today. I want to thank you all for joining us in the after show. Also, thank you for your time and spending some time answering questions in the first hour as well. We have a good time doing these live streams regardless. I like preparing for the first set. I like seeing what the results of these questions are so I can make it a little bit harder next time for you. Really ask you the questions that make sense to help you study and prepare for this Network Plus certification. We do one of these Network Plus certification live streams every month. You can always check our calendar to know when the next one is going to be at professormesser.com/calendar. And if you were to look at that calendar today, you would see there is a Security Plus certification study group planned a week from today. Next Wednesday, we would love for you to come back and join us for that as well. We will have all brand new questions directly from the latest Security Plus exam, and there's usually some pretty interesting questions in the after show as well. Thank you so much for being here. We do enjoy having you here and doing these. We could not do it without you, and we thank you so much for your support. We will see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. Thanks, everybody.